1. The precariousness of contemporary fire. Just 15 seconds. That's the brief window before your flame, and thus your safety, might vanish. A gentle drizzle descends. Your supposedly storm-proof lighter malfunctions, and abruptly you find yourself chilled, soaked, and vulnerable. The fragility of modern fire is astonishing. Now, consider the polar opposite. Winter of 1632. Temperatures plummet to -20 degrees Celsius. A Swedish force of 12,000 men navigates the snow-laden German forests. No shelters, no logistical support, no second chances. In that era, the loss of fire typically spelt demise before sunrise. Yet, these soldiers conjured flames that defied blizzards, while our fires falter in a light rain. Why? Because they possessed an insight we've lost: genuine fire proficiency. The physics, biology, and self-discipline required to generate warmth when nature dictates otherwise. Today, we're unearthing that forgotten manual. You'll discover how a simple log transformed into a self-sustaining incinerator, how a specific fungus maintained an ember for a month, and why ancient ignition techniques still surpass contemporary gear during tempests. If the power grid failed tonight, could you manifest a fire that persists? Let's delve in. 2. The Swedish Torch, the 17th century combustion engine. When your open-air fire yields to the rain, it feels almost personal. You collect the timber, ignite the spark, tenderly nurture the ember, and then the initial droplet falls. The earth saps your warmth, moisture smothers your nascent flame, and the fire dissipates before it ever truly thrives. Yet, 4 centuries passed, during the harshest winters of the 30 Years' War, Swedish soldiers devised a method of fire-making that not only withstood storms, but flourished within them. They termed it the Swedish Torch. To grasp its efficacy, one must envision their circumstances. Snow driven horizontally, fierce winds whipping through icy valleys, and soldiers acutely aware that without dependable heat, dawn would bring execution. They could not tolerate a feeble flame. They required a mechanism. Consequently, they constructed one from a solitary log. They positioned it upright, carved deep vertical grooves from its summit, and transmuted a segment of wood into a controlled pillar of combustion. This was no ordinary blaze. It was a self-ventilating combustion engine, expertly crafted from the fundamental laws of nature. Within that vertical log, a potent phenomenon stirred, now known as the stack effect. As the fire at the pinnacle intensified, the ascending heat drew cold air upwards through the slits, supplying the flames with an unceasing flow of oxygen. The log respired like a living entity, even amidst rain, even against wind, even with unseasoned green wood that would typically hiss and die out. The wooden encasement shielded the core of the fire. The regulated airflow fueled it with precision, and the temperature ascended so dramatically that the inherent moisture within the log was expelled as vapor. What the contemporary camper deems impossible, the Swedish soldier considered a routine day. And here lies today's lesson for you. Most individuals construct their fires directly on the ground, allowing the cold earth to dissipate every precious unit of heat. In inclement weather, this error is lethal. Elevation equals survival. When you elevate your fire on a platform of logs or within a torch configuration, you isolate its warmth from the freezing, absorbent soil beneath. You afford the flame the opportunity to breathe, and in doing so, you grant yourself the chance to endure. The Swedish torch represented more than a clever stratagem. It was a potent reminder of something we too frequently neglect. Fire is not an accident. It is engineered. And when nature turns hostile, those who grasp this concept will outlast those who do not. Remain attentive, because the deeper we delve, the more clearly you'll perceive how medieval soldiers harnessed biology, chemistry, and sheer willpower to conjure fire in storms that would extinguish our modern world. 3. The biological fire battery. Amadou and the 5,000-year-old secret. Before a fire can rage, before it can warm a freezing soldier or preserve a life in the darkness, it must first be brought into existence. And that initial moment, the spark, is perpetually the most delicate. In a blizzard, when snow sheets horizontally and the wind siphons warmth from your digits, sustaining a spark is nearly impossible. Contemporary butane lighters freeze, matches fracture. Ferro rods launch sparks that instantly vanish in the wind. However, medieval soldiers possessed a different advantage. They carried Amadou, a fire starter so potent, so dependable, and so ancient that it predates documented history. We uncovered its secret from an individual who never lived long enough to recount his tale. Ötzi, the Iceman, preserved in the Alps for over 5,000 years, discovered reclined in a cradle of ice with an arrow embedded in his back. Yet, even in death, he clutched his most cherished possession, a fire-starting kit. Within that kit was a peculiar, leathery substance, the processed inner material of the horsehoof fungus, the identical substance medieval soldiers relied upon 15 centuries later. To them, Amadou was not merely tinder, it was a biological fire battery. They would extract the internal mycelial layer of the fungus, boil it in wood ash lye or even stale urine to saturate it with nitrates, then pound it until its fibers loosened into a soft, suede-like mat. What they fashioned was akin to enchantment. Thousands of microscopic chambers composed of cellulose and lignin, perfectly spaced to facilitate oxygen intake and cradle heat. A piece no larger than a tennis ball could retain a smouldering ember, not for minutes, not for hours, but for weeks, sometimes even an entire month. Imagine that. A fire you can store, a fire you can transport, a fire that slumbers, awaiting activation with nothing more than a solitary spark. And this is where the contrast becomes almost embarrassing for us. Our modern matches become brittle in the cold. Our lighters refuse to ignite when chilled. But Amadou, when a spark lands upon it, does not merely flash and die. It glows, it intensifies, it propagates like a heartbeat. And the wind we dread, the wind that extinguishes your lighter, actually nourishes the ember, making it hotter and brighter. This was not serendipity or magic. It was engineering, ancient biological engineering that our ancestors perfected long before steel, butane, or waterproof matches. And the lesson is straightforward. If you command the ember, you command the fire. And if you can transport the ember through the tempest, you can outlive the night. Remain attentive, because next we'll reveal why medieval ignition methods succeed precisely where modern conveniences falter, and how grasping that distinction could preserve your life when all else ceases to function. 4. Percussion versus convenience. Why your lighter fails. There's a subtle treachery inherent in modern firemaking. We rely on our lighters because they seem effortless. A flick of the thumb, a small spark, a modest flame, and we assume the fire will comply. However, the moment the weather turns severe, when rain commences, when the cold intensifies its grip, that convenience collapses far more quickly than we anticipate. The truth is starkly simple. Your lighter doesn't malfunction due to bad luck. It fails because the laws of physics are unforgiving. Water possesses an enormous latent heat of vaporization. This implies that the instant your lighter's flame contacts damp wood, every ounce of its energy is consumed to evaporate the moisture rather than ignite the fuel source. A drizzle transforms into a thief. A wet log becomes a heat sink that drains the flame before it even has a chance to flourish. Then, as the temperature drops, your own physiology joins the opposition. In extreme cold, your blood vessels constrict to safeguard your core organs. Blood withdraws from your fingers, rendering them clumsy, numb, and nearly incapacitated. Attempting to maneuver the tiny wheel on a plastic lighter when your hands are trembling so violently you can't feel your own skin borders on impossible. Contemporary tools demand fine motor control. Blizzards eradicate that capability. But medieval soldiers did not depend on convenience. They depended on certainty. Their ignition method, flint and steel, was brutally straightforward and brutally dependable. A steel striker grasped in a gloved or numbed hand. A sharp stone wielded with the force of the arm and shoulder. Large muscles, broad movements, no fragile components, no fuel to deplete, no button to freeze, and absolutely no concern about whether the tool had just been submerged in snow, water, mud, or blood. Steel is impervious to the cold. Stone does not jam, and the spark they generate burns at temperatures significantly hotter than the diminutive flame of a lighter. This was the brilliance of percussion firemaking. It did not necessitate dexterity. It did not necessitate ideal weather conditions. It did not necessitate luck. It demanded knowledge, rhythm, and the understanding that survival implements must function even when the body cannot. And today, the message resonates louder than ever. When you trade reliability for ease, you acquire safety on credit, and the storm invariably demands repayment. Stay with me, because next we will explore how medieval soldiers located fuel even when their surroundings were waterlogged, frozen, or lifeless, and how those decisions transformed the impossible into a roaring inferno. 5. Nature's napalm, sourcing the widowmakers. When everything around you is saturated, when the forest floor squelches beneath your boots, and every fallen branch feels like a sponge, most people assume making fire is unachievable. But medieval soldiers understood otherwise. They recognized that the fire you require is rarely the fire you can actually see. It lurks above you, patiently waiting, desiccated and perilous. They sought what they termed standing deadwood, or, more ominously, widowmakers. These were defunct branches that clung precariously high in the canopy, untouched by rain, unaffected by melting snow, suspended in the dry air where moisture could not reach them. A single forceful strike could bring one down, and within that pale, weathered timber lay the driest fuel across the entire battlefield. Yet, even that proved insufficient when storms turned savage. So soldiers carried two secret armaments, materials so potent that they acted almost like natural combustion accelerants. The first was Fatwood, the resin-saturated heart of ancient pine trees. When a pine tree withers, its sap recedes to the core, where it hardens into a thick, amber-rich resin. That resin accounts for 80% of its fuel mass by weight. Even when drenched by rain or submerged in snow, Fatwood ignites with an intense resinous flame that effortlessly repels moisture. A single spark transforms it into a torch, spewing embers and radiating heat potent enough to dry out other damp fuel. To a freezing soldier in the darkness, Fatwood was not merely kindling, it was a guarantee of survival. Its counterpart was birch bark. Peeling a strip of birch instantly releases its distinct, pure fragrance of betulin oil. This organic compound catches fire with remarkable ease and continues to burn even when soaked. It curls into a snug, papery cradle that shields the flame from wind, functioning like a natural, waterproof matchbox long before such inventions existed. For troops enduring treks through icy valleys, a handful of birch bark was more valuable than a flask of lamp oil, and far more dependable than modern alternatives. These were not just clever tricks, but fundamental survival instincts, an innate comprehension of how the wilderness preserves its fire, even in the harshest winter. The immediate lesson for us is clear. If the ground fails you, look higher. If the elements threaten to extinguish your fire, seek out fuel that refuses to yield. For in the wild, nature offers not just challenges, but also tools of survival, if you know where to find them. Remain with me. Next, we delve into one of the most somber narratives in pyro history, where an army, privy to these very secrets, still perished because they neglected to safeguard the flame. Sixth, the consequences of neglect. The Carolean Death March. History has a brutal way of exacting retribution on those who disregard fundamental principles. Nowhere is this lesson more stark or chilling than in the winter of 1719. The Great Northern War was drawing to a close when 6,000 Swedish Carolean soldiers embarked on what was intended to be a straightforward retreat across the tidal mountains. They were rigorously trained, highly disciplined, and possessed the hard-won wisdom passed down through generations who had mastered fire in the world's most unforgiving winters. Yet knowledge is futile if it remains unprotected. As the column ascended into the high mountain passes, the sky unleashed a ferocious blizzard. Snow hammered horizontally, winds shrieked through the valleys, and temperatures plummeted so rapidly that breath froze mid-air. In this pandemonium, even the smallest missteps proved fatal. Their tinder kits became saturated. Their scouts, accustomed to finding standing deadwood, were isolated by whiteout conditions. Every spark they attempted to create was instantly snuffed out by the howling gale. Without fire, the cold showed no mercy. 3,000 men, half the force, succumbed to freezing in a single night. It was not the muskets of their adversaries that claimed them. It was not a lost battle, a flawed strategy, or inadequate leadership. It was the absence of flame, the simple, brutal outcome of forgetting that fire is more than just warmth. Fire is survival. Fire is discipline. Fire is life. The Carolean Death March, serves as a chilling admonition etched in ice. One cannot bargain with winter, nor can one negotiate with the cold. You either vigilantly guard your fire literacy like a weapon, or you pay for its absence in blood. As we approach the final chapter, we will see why this forgotten knowledge extends its relevance far beyond the battlefield. For in any tempest, ancient or modern, the core question remains unchanged. Can you kindle a fire when nature endeavours to strip you of everything? Stay with me. The conclusion might permanently alter your perception of fire. Seventh, the conclusion. Are you a master or a consumer? Ultimately, our predecessors endured not because they possessed greater fortitude or courage or were blessed with fortune. They survived because they remembered. They approached fire not as a mere convenience, but as a rigorous discipline. They lived by an unwritten decree. Devote most of your effort to preparation, gathering fatwood, fashioning an amadou, keeping tinder impeccably dry, and only a fraction to the spark itself. Today, we engage in the opposite behaviour. We hover over damp branches, flicking a lighter 100 times in the hopes of a miracle. We have exchanged mastery for expediency. We have surrendered proficiency for ease. And the moment the weather turns hostile, that exchange becomes agonizingly evident. In a medieval encampment, the role of fire master was sacred. One individual bore the immense responsibility of sustaining the lives of thousands. They understood that fire was more than just heat. Fire was morale. Fire was medicine. Fire was the fragile, luminous boundary between life and death on a winter's night. They did not rely on chance, because luck quickly dissipates. So, the true question now is both straightforward and unsettling. If the power grid failed tonight, and a storm raged outside, tearing the world apart, would you possess the knowledge to make a single log ignite? Would you know where to discover the fire concealed within a tree? Would you recall what the soldiers, shepherds, hunters, and wanderers of antiquity instinctively knew? Because nature finds no utility in your lighter, your buttons, or your gadgets. Fire is a science, certainly, but it is also a memory humanity cherished for millennia, and one we have almost entirely forgotten. Therefore, learn it anew. Carry it once more, not in your pocket, but within your hands, your instincts, your preparedness. Thank you for viewing History Prime. If this exploration into forgotten fire literacy has granted you a fresh perspective on the world, please consider subscribing to support more narratives like this. Stay warm, remain curious, and remember, the ember never forgets. Before we conclude, allow me to impart one final image. Igniting a fire in a blizzard is akin to besieging a fortress. You do not hurl pebbles at the ramparts and hope for their collapse. That is equivalent to using your lighter on wet wood. Instead, you construct a siege engine, the Swedish Torch. You identify the vulnerability in the defences, standing deadwood awaiting above the snow. And you dispatch a silent infiltrator, the glowing ember of amadou, which slips through the crevices and opens the gate from within. Firefighting is a constant struggle, and as history consistently demonstrates, only those who are adequately prepared can ever truly prevail.